Pigweed here. Today we review a dopplebock and discuss, is Catholicism making a comeback? Well, good evening, Crowhill.
Good evening, Pigweed. How's it going? How about some beer and conversation?
That sounds like a great idea. What are we drinking?
This is a doppelbock. It's a homebrew. I had to sneak it past Chesterton over there, but he said I had to give him one.
Very good.
So, what's on your mind?
So a couple of years ago, it's maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, we did a show called The Decline of Christianity.
Okay.
And discussed the rise of the nuns.
Yeah.
And, what its potential effects are on Western civilization.
Right.
Now I'm hearing some numbers on people returning to Christianity.
Right.
And is that what's going on?
Yeah, not so fast. Yes and no. I mean, there are some... Always, there's like ups and downs. There's always somebody's getting bigger, somebody's getting smaller. Generally speaking, the trends are bad, but there are some bright spots.
Okay, there's a pocket here that we can talk about.
There's a pocket.
We'll talk about that after we try...
Calaminator.
The Calaminator.
The Calaminator. So, every doppelbock ends with A-T-O-R.
Right.
So, this one's called Calaminator because I did as many things wrong as I could think to do wrong.
You might have broken a personal record.
I might have broken a personal record on doing things wrong. I put the aroma hops in for bittering hops and the vice versa.
Yeah. The volume was too high.
Volume was too high. Had the problem of not doing the sanitation right. And I put the wrong yeast in at the end.
Because you wanted to do two different batches. But the primary, you wanted to use the real doppelbock
I wanted to use the
yeast.
correct. It was not actually a doppelbock yeast, but it was close. What I was doing was I wanted to
for the large batch.
For the large batch, and the other batch. But so I switched that. So that's why we have two. We have two glasses here. So your big glass is Calaminator with Safe Ale 05, and your little glass is Calaminator with the better version, the other yeast that's more appropriate for the doppelbock.
Well, I would say flavor-wise, the lack of sanitation, possible infection problem is certainly not there.
No, not evident at all.
It's got all of the right flavors, and it doesn't taste thin as a result of the high volume.
No.
I just think all in all, that's a very good... And this one's kegged.
This one's kegged, and this one is bottled.
Right.
And, so I was pleased. I mean, I was afraid that because I did the sanitation wrong, I was going to get some sort of a horrible mess. And with everything else I did wrong, it actually ended up turning out to be a pretty decent beer.
And I'm not sure if this is a beer that is yeast dependent or not, but I'm not really getting.
I'm not getting any big difference.
No. And yeast prices are going up.
They are.
I'm starting to feel like whatever's the cheapest.
I know, exactly. And you know what you can do as a home brewer is reuse the yeasts. And I've never gotten into that because I always thought that was just a buck for another thing. Now it's getting to be more expensive for the yeast.
And it's sort of like the next stage.
The next level.
Your next level is when you... Yeah. When you reconstitute and wash your yeast, because that yeast is still active, and big brewers, of course, they do it because it's the money is serious, and I understand they can get 8-9 generations, right?
Yeah, and I've heard brewers tell me that yeast doesn't even get into its stride until like the third or fourth generation. Yeah. So anyway, it turned out well despite all my efforts to ruin it, and I'm kind of pleased.
And considering the topic, this is the favorite of our Belgian monks.
No, this is a doppelbock wouldn't be Belgian monks; it would be like German monks.
Yeah, but this is the
Lenten beer.
Yes, during Lent, there are certain gutsy monks who forego food.
Yeah.
But they got to get your nutrition somewhere.
That's right.
They even got it approved by the Pope.
That's right.
Back in the 1500s. So anyway.
So I think there's like 3 different ways we could approach this question. One is, you found this article, How Catholicism Got Cool.
Yes.
Which would be an interesting approach. Another is this phrase that started to become popular on the internet, rad trad.
Yes. You want to explain that?
And then the other one is just kind of an overarching concept about transcendence that might be appropriate. But let's start with rad trad. So rad trad is internet shorthand for radical traditionalist. And especially in the context of traditional
So
Catholic.
what church did we go attend that was more Catholic than normal Catholic?
Yeah, so that was in Baltimore, and that was, gosh, I'm not going to remember the name.
But what distinguished it from regular Catholic?
Okay,
Mass?
because it was Anglican Rite Catholic.
Okay.
So it was in union with the Pope. So it was actually a Catholic church.
Yes.
But they used the Anglican order of the Mass with some modifications. But the priest in that church was married because he had been an Anglican priest, and Anglican priests can marry. So he was an Anglican priest converted and became a Catholic priest, and kept his wife, of course, and so that church is a very traditional. Does
it fall under rad trad?
That's a good question. Maybe.
All right.
Maybe. I think sometimes rad trad is pejorative. It's, it's supposed to be people who are so hung up on the liturgy and so hung up on, how much Latin you're using and this, that, and the other thing, that it's a negative kind of a term. But I don't think it has to be. And some people, it's kind of like, remember when Trump referred to Hillary supporters as nasty women, and then Hillary supporters started wearing shirts that said nasty women. Sometimes you make an accusation, and then people just say, "Okay, fine." You're going to call me that. That's
deplorables, like a proud deplorable.
A proud deplorable. That's right, or a bitter clinger. Whatever it was. So some people have sort of adopted the rad trad label as, okay, fine. You're going to call me that. I'm a radical traditionalist.
Right. So I think the suggestion is that, what was the other show we did on what good are liberal churches or something like that. And the point being, if all your church is going to do is confirm what you're already doing, it's probably not going to be that satisfying and worth getting up on a Sunday.
Right.
And I think we're seeing some of that in this, where people are like, I kind of want the structure.
Yeah.
I want
to be challenged. I want to hear, I don't want to hear everything is fine. I want you to tell me there are some things I have to do.
Yes. There's structure, right. You're going to ask of me changes in my behavior.
Yeah.
Well, the other show we did was beautiful architectural churches versus storefront churches. Yeah. And I think part of its appeal is the smells and the bells and the beauty and the music, and if I could say here, in this article from the Free Press, the writer, I don't have her name here, like any convert, everyone I spoke to had very personal reasons for joining the Catholic Church, but there was one thing that they all agreed on: the religion fulfilled their yearning for transcendence better than anything else.
Right. Yeah. So Madeleine Kearns is her name.
Okay.
Yeah. It's called "How Catholicism Got Cool," and it's an interesting article, and I'd like to go a little more into it. I thought maybe here's some 5 bullet points on what rad trad sort of means.
Okay.
They generally are not thrilled with their Vatican II reforms, especially the new Mass.
Huh?
They typically insist on the Tridentine Mass, the Latin Mass. They sometimes question the legitimacy or orthodoxy of recent popes, especially Francis, Frank the hippie pope. They frequently emphasize pre-Vatican II theology, aesthetics, and culture, and are typically hostile to what they perceive as modernist influences. So basically they're saying that Vatican II was, if not a mistake, at least went too far in some ways. Well, so some people will say that the council itself was fine, but the interpretation of the council went off the rails. And that people took Vatican II and went with their craziness and,
But, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs, but was everything in Latin up until then?
Well, my understanding is that, the Mass was in Latin, not the sermon, of course.
Yeah.
But the Mass itself was in Latin before Vatican II.
Yeah. I would have to, so I'm going to say I'm okay with moving away from Latin.
No, exactly.
to English.
Me too.
Now, who was the Pope?
John the Second.
Okay.
So the
So are you saying it was motivated by the council, or it was driven by the Pope at the time?
Well, the Pope called the council, Vatican II Council, right. And they came up with a bunch of various documents.
Were they concerned about falling numbers? Did they feel like the church needed a little kick in the pants?
My understanding is that the Pope at the time just felt like the church had some new issues it needed to address.
It needed to update itself a little bit?
They needed to do some kind of, house cleaning and came together with this council. And that the radical elements thought, oh, this is a great idea. We can get rid of Latin. We can get rid of,
Fish on Friday.
Fish on Friday. We can get rid of celibate priests.
Did that come out of Vatican II?
Yeah. So before then, Catholics were supposed to abstain from meat every Friday. And then after Vatican II, it was only during Lent.
It's only during Lent.
Yeah. So a lot of things were relaxed after Vatican II. But a lot of people think that the implementation of Vatican II went way too far because you had all these crazy hippie priests doing weird stuff, pushing it too far. So the radical traditionalists are kind of trying to push it back the other way. But I think the bigger question here is, why are people nowadays, in 2025, why are people turning towards conservative Catholicism?
And primarily men.
Which is another weird thing.
So I don't know if you've got the numbers in front of you about the number of adult baptisms.
Yeah, have been increasing.
Mostly men.
Have been increasing, not only in the United States, in France and other places too. And what's interesting is, generally speaking, women are more religious than men.
Yes.
But we're seeing more men turning to traditional Catholicism than women, which is noteworthy and an interesting phenomenon. Yeah. So I think, why is this happening?
So in contrast to, the Jeans and folk singers,
right?
The
priests wearing weird vestments with butterflies on them and stuff.
Yeah. All of the wokiness, you've got 2,000 years of tradition, and now you see your priest or your pastor embracing ideas that are 5 years old.
Right. And twang on a guitar, singing some silly 60s song.
Right. Yeah. Whereas the sense of wonder, the sense of mystery,
mm-hmm.
the sense of connecting with something greater,
right,
through all of your senses, and not grappling on an intellectual level.
Yeah.
And you're like, the stained glass. I mean, the structure of the church.
Yeah.
That's traditionally been there, was always there for that reason.
Yeah.
And so it's got a new appeal now.
I think one way that people take Christianity is they go way too intellectual. They make everything about like what you can think, what you can believe. Everything is about what you understand. It's intellectual, not in the sense of hoity-toity smart intellectual, but in the sense of everything comes down to the intellect. Yeah. What you think, what you perceive. And other people go a little bit too far in the direction of mystery and experience and touchy-feely kind of stuff. And I think one thing about Catholicism is that there's a very, very strong intellectual tradition. St. Thomas Aquinas was no dope, and you have a very, very strong intellectual tradition, but you also have a mystical tradition. You also have this concept of statues and art and icons and everything else, vestments and incense and everything else. So it appeals to the whole man. It's not just saying, I'm going to appeal to what you're thinking, and it's not saying I'm just going to appeal to what you're feeling. It's kind of more of a holistic approach.
But it's interesting that that this is where, after saying that we see religion on the decline, where you would see the uptick, and even in Latin America, was going the other way, was going evangelical.
Going Pentecostal. Yeah, so so Pentecostals are the speaking in tongues people.
So even further than
just evangelical. It's like Pentecostals are the ones who speak in tongues, believe in like having healing services, and some of them go as far as like picking up snakes kind of stuff. That's more the Appalachia kind of thing. But in South America and Africa,
that would be Pentecostal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in South America and in Africa, you see a huge growth in Pentecostalism and there's an appeal there. There's a fervor. There's a wow, this is exciting and real and emotionally resonant and really fires me up. So there's that. But that's very different.
You've got the full band up there.
Yeah, right. But that's a very different reaction than what we see in this How Catholicism Got Cool. Their reaction is, I want something peaceful, something transcendent, something that appeals to my senses, something where I go in and it's quiet. It's a different kind of a reaction.
And maybe in this busy, noisy, screen-filled, life that we have now, maybe that is part of, like there's everything's got, everything has to be fast, jump, cut, that a little bit of solace and a little bit of quiet and a little bit of reverence.
Yeah. That's actually a very interesting point. The whole idea of, can I take a break from my phone?
Right. Yeah, right. Instead of having, the evangelicals, which have massive screens,
right,
and images on all sides with the music and the thing, and it's like, how about?
I'm still on this. What's the chemical? Dopamine. I'm still on this dopamine thing. I want to be calm for a minute.
How about if we just listen to some Bach and quietly?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's another element that as I read through this article, is kind of the go big or go home kind of feeling. Is that a lot of people feel like, if I'm going to do this religion thing, I want to do it all the way. I don't want to be halfway in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an element to Catholicism that you might not pick it up, actually, if you were to go to your average Catholic church, because average Catholic churches can be pretty mealy-mouthed and boring.
All right, finish your point. Let me write what I'm going to ask you.
So the experience of Catholicism in the local parish is not the same as Catholicism in its 2,000-year history and all the majesty and the deep, rich tradition that you have in the whole package.
Right.
Like when you go to the local church, you might get a priest who preaches a homily that I could make up a better one in a minute, and you might have music that sounds like it's written by a drunk rabbit that's middle-aged rabbit on antidepressants, because a lot of the music in Catholic churches is just awful. But despite all this, despite all the really terrible application of Catholicism in local parishes, there's still this. There's the saints, and there's the history, and there's St. Thomas Aquinas, and there's the doctrine, and there's this long, a much bigger picture going on here.
I'm getting the sense, though, that the people that were interviewed in this are going to St. Peter's in New York, or going to the Majestic.
Yes.
Right. So obviously not every corner Catholic church is a 16th century cathedral, Gothic cathedral. But
some of them look almost as bad as some of the evangelical churches. I mean, it's really. You go into some Catholic churches and you think, well, this looks like a storefront.
This is it. Tell you what. There's a plastic Jesus on a cross, and that's all you got.
And you got a presence lamp and an altar, but otherwise it just looks like
and some fake stained glass, which is really just.
I know,
painted.
It's such a turnoff. It's amazing, but
all right. So actually, that leads to my question here is, I feel like there's more continuity, and I could be wrong about this. This is my question.
Yeah.
From Catholic Church to Catholic Church than if you went from like Presbyterian Church to Presbyterian Church. You'd be like, wow. I mean, these are so different. But at least in the Catholic Church, I would feel like I'm basically getting the same thing no matter where I went.
Well, that reminds me of a story. A friend of mine is an Italian guy, and he was telling me about this church that he went to in Washington, D.C., and he loved it, and it was really great. And he said, you ought to go sometime. And I said, well, is it in English? He said, you know what they're saying. Right? Because if you've been to the Mass for a while, you know what's being said. If they're saying it in Italian or saying it in something else,
Latin,
whatever. Yeah, it doesn't really matter all that much. So in that respect, the basic form of the Mass is going to be the same.
Yeah.
They're going to be saying the same prayers. They're going to be reading the same readings. So there's a lot of conformity there. In terms of how reverent it is, in terms of what kind of music you're going to be exposed to, what the priest is like, those things can vary quite a bit. One time we were on a camping trip, and we ended up going to this little church in this little town, and we walked. It's supposed to be a Catholic church, and we walked in, and it was like everybody was chatting, and there was all this noise and confusion.
Right.
And I'm like, is this a Catholic church, really? Because Catholic churches, you go in and you're quiet so people can pray.
Right.
And that's the general atmosphere. But this particular one little church was just bizarre. They seemed to want to do everything their own way. Right. Once they actually got into the Mass, it was, the Mass. But there is more consistency between Catholic churches in some respects. Mm-hmm. But then when you get into the Protestant world, I guess between two Presbyterian churches in the same denomination, in the Presbyterian Church in America or something like that, they're going to be pretty similar.
Okay.
But like if you go to a Presbyterian versus a Methodist versus a Baptist versus a whatever, there's going to be differences there. Yeah.
So what about... Mrs. Pigweed is from Mexico, Catholic, and, going to church every weekend was part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
More, but it really seemed, from what I can gather, a cultural identity kind of a thing. Yeah. And there's a lot of Friday night, or Saturday night, where you can just knock it out, and then now you don't have to...
Yeah. So they changed I'm not sure when this rule changed.
Then you can go out and party, and you don't have to get up and go to Mass
early in the morning. Yeah. So this is kind of weird, because I think what they did was they followed the Jewish concept of the day starting at sundown. So a day... we think of a day as midnight to midnight.
Yeah.
Where the Jewish conception is more sundown to sundown.
I see. So you go to 8 o'clock at night. Yeah,
the evening before Sunday is really Sunday. So nowadays you can
That's how you can qualify that as Sunday.
Yeah, although that's been stretched a bit, so that now, you give people an inch and they'll take a mile. But nowadays you can go to a 5 o'clock Saturday evening Mass. It's not, the sun is not anywhere near set, but still, but that counts as your Sunday obligation.
She's like, but a lot of times, you go, but you're kind of just like standing out front smoking cigarettes and going, well, that counts. You go in, you touch the water, and you say a prayer, and then you go chit-chat with your friends.
But that's actually an interesting question, is there some benefit in having
even that
a ritual that you do, even if you're just doing it in a perfunctory sort of a way.
Perfunctory.
It gives some sense of identity and culture, and I'm not saying
and you're acknowledging something.
Yeah,
you're acknowledging you're at least admitting that there is some important value to do, even if you're not doing the best job you could.
Exactly. You're at least admitting that there is an obligation. Yeah. So I think another part of this article that we went through was they talked about the aesthetic elements of Catholicism. Yeah. And that made me think, as a contrast, like evangelicalism, what's the aesthetic There's no art. There's no. It's more like a concert sometimes than it is like.
Yeah, it's it's in a repurposed grocery store.
Yeah. Just whatever location works.
I mean, you see, I think when I finally do go to Europe.
Okay.
Gothic cathedrals are going to be my jam.
Yeah.
I mean,
why not? I mean,
just
that would be
just
interesting.
Be so fascinated by even if you take the religious element out, just like the engineering.
Oh yeah.
What do you mean? I mean, no computers or electrical cranes or how is this thing even done?
How did they do
it?
it? How did they lift those stones way up there? Yeah, I mean, we went into St. Matthew's Cathedral downtown a little while ago.
Oh,
it's just an amazing place.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
You could just go in there and just sit and look
feels
around.
Nice.
Yeah.
It just
and there's a smell to it, and there's a solidness to it.
Yeah, and there are. It's all of one piece. And then, yet there are individual chapels designated to different. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. So other things that came out of this for me was like trying to experience religion through their senses rather than just grapple with it on an intellectual level. I thought that was very interesting. The idea of the beauty about it. Now, to tell you the truth, there is a whole lot of beauty in Catholicism. But then you've got the music, which if you haven't picked it up yet, I'm not a fan. I wrote this down. Catholic music is like a depressed, middle-aged, drunk rabbit. Wrote it. That's my impression of Catholic music. Now, why is it that young men are being drawn into Catholicism more than women?
There you go. And as you said, women tend to be more religious.
Generally speaking, yes.
In this. Well, in the observation of this writer, when she went out to find older, grown-ups who are not raised in the church, that older people, and they tend to be sort of college-aged, the ones that she talked to, the 20-somethings that are drawn to the church, mostly men.
Yeah. And I think part of it is that men have been demonized. Right. Men are somewhat adrift and kind of aimless because traditional masculine pursuits they've been told that that's toxic and that's wrong.
Right.
So some of it is a question of I want to find something stable and something I can rely on. So there's that element to it. But on the other side of it, why aren't women more religious? I think a big thing that's going on there is just the way that our culture has lied to women and told them this absolutely absurd idea of what their lives and their...
Well, I think what they're doing is they're conflating religion with this false notion of patriarchy.
Yeah.
And
there's some of that.
So, part of you liberating yourself and being the full woman that you can be is throwing off the shackles of the patriarchy, men, and the church.
Right.
And, you see a lot of, liberal hostility to that.
Yes, there's that. And there's also just so much in our culture today is oriented around me and selfishness and just getting what I want, and that's not what the church is about.
And people are finding some satisfaction in recognizing something outside of themselves,
right?
And so, I guess that's
now. There's another little thing that toward the end of the article. Have you heard of Ross Douthat? I think is how you say Ross Douthat.
Can't say it.
He wrote this book called Believe, Why Everyone Should Be Religious. And I'm not recommending it. I'm not saying it's a bad book, but I tried to read it. I got about halfway through and I wasn't impressed. So anyway, he's a New York Times columnist. He said that Roman Catholic...
They allow New York Times columnists to be religious?
One.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have one.
All right.
Yeah. He said Roman Catholicism is increasingly coded as the natural option for American believers who are highly educated or would-be elites, playing the role that used to be played by, say, Episcopalianism or Presbyterianism. And that's very true. In the old days, like earlier in the mid 20th century,
okay,
the elite, you were probably Episcopalian or Presbyterian. But look at the Supreme Court. You're either Jewish or Catholic.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are no Protestants.
I'm not sure what Amy Coney Barrett is. She Catholic?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of.
What about Brown?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But so Episcopalian used to be like if you were part of the elite, you were an Episcopalian or maybe a Presbyterian. But nowadays, there's a sort of status to being a Catholic that wasn't true.
That wasn't true. That's funny because it seems to me that's where all the history is. That's where all the Roman Empire comes from. You know what I mean? That's the sense of tradition. Seems like that's the more serious of religion, but it wasn't always so.
Absolutely not. I mean, America was very solidly Protestant, and you had like mainstream Protestantism was the.
So I mean, so there's some other indications. I forgot about the Supreme Court that. That Catholicism is not, on the wane and being gradually replaced.
Think about it. It was only back in Kennedy's time where people thought, could a Catholic become president?
Right, that's true.
I mean, Catholicism, the United States was very anti-Catholic for a long time. Yeah. And there's been a huge change in that respect.
Yes, and in the colonies, there was only the fine state of Maryland.
That's right. That allowed Catholics to have their thing. So I wanted to go through this one list of, like, what are some reasons that people might be drawn to Catholicism?
All right.
And one is, we talked about it, transcendence.
Yeah.
This idea that there's some meaning beyond just what we see and feel. The second one, I really like this one, suffering with purpose. The concept that God is a man who suffered is a very compelling sort of an argument. It makes suffering is a huge mystery. Why in the world is there suffering in the world? I mean, the problem of evil is a huge, horrible, difficult question. But Christianity's answer is I can't tell you all those reasons, but God Himself suffers right alongside you, and that's a pretty compelling sort of a thing. But that's for Christianity in general. Yeah.
Not necessarily Catholicism. Right. But yes, I get, because you had some of these people in the article who were the one guy was Japanese.
Yeah.
And
his
he was
friend stabbed him.
Yes, that guy.
Yeah.
But his thing was, you know what? The sense that God understands my suffering or human beings' suffering, because He actually, walked a mile in my sandals.
Yeah. So transcendence, suffering, and then aesthetic experience as a gateway. I thought that was interesting, sort of like engaging the whole body. And then community and identity and agency and control. I thought those kind of 5 buckets were an interesting way to perceive why someone might be drawn into, even in our very secular age, why someone might be drawn into this.
Mm-hmm. And, well, how about this? Here's one other thing I know. I have a friend who's a very liberal, spiritual but not religious kind of a guy.
Yeah.
And when you think of rebellion in terms of teenagers.
Exactly.
So here he is, the hippie friend raising his hippie kids.
Right.
His son signed himself up for a Bible college.
Right.
And so his idea of rebellion is he's into like black conservative political thinkers and a church.
Right.
So, you know what? Maybe there's a little bit of anti-church backlash going on just for like, what did the cool kids do? Right? When your parents were straight laced in the 50s, we're going to be hippies and grow our hair long because our dad's hair is short.
And now our parents are hippies and we're going to be conservative.
Yeah,
it's like Michael J. Fox in that TV show Family Ties.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
His parents are both hippies and he basically rebelled by being a Nixon Republican. Right. So I think there might be some to that people are just, there's always, things kind of go in a sine wave. They go up and they go down over and over again, and people react. And people are reacting to the meaninglessness and the despair and the lack of purpose that we have in the world today. And they're saying, okay, I want to find something else. Yeah.
All right. So I would say that as a non-Catholic, non-church goer, I like it. Yeah. I'm okay with this.
It's
I would like to see it.
How is it hurting anybody? I think one of the things that people don't pay enough attention to is what are the kind of the disciplines and the practices and the things that make for a solid society. Right. And this might be one of the
things that holds them together.
Yeah. All right. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Remember to visit us at pigweedandcrowhill.com or send us an email at pigweedshow@gmail.com.